Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later as we're about to check out this rather hulking great specimen, which is of course a new release from Ocular Max. It's Stellarus Prominon. What a name! And for those of you not in the know, this is a Masterpiece style take on classic G1 character Star Convoy, who is in turn an updated form of iconic Autobot leader Convoy, better known as Optimus Prime in the West. Perhaps you've heard of him. Now before we begin, I should mention that today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below. I'd also be very grateful if you could leave me a like for this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also in the description is a link to my Patreon, where in exchange for your support you can get access to a ton of perks, including exclusive galleries and early access to videos such as this. Finally, there's also a link to my Redbubble store where you can pick up a huge range of different designs, including loads of my photos across all kinds of different merch. I'm uploading new ideas all the time, so be sure to check it out and treat yourself. Anyway, here is the big lad himself, looking mighty fine in that robot form, and you may notice in a bit of an unusual twist that he's been unboxed already. Well, rest assured that I did film that bit, but due to a few technical difficulties, the footage is now seemingly unavailable. But not to worry, as it's only cardboard. How exciting could it have been? I'm going to gently tease open your flaps now before I slide my hand inside and softly eke out that big old clamshell of yours. Are you ready for me? Oh yeah. So before we get too off track, let's get cracking with his robot mode then, shall we? And the first thing you'll notice is that he's big. Very big. In fact, he's so big that honestly it's going to be the main talking point of this toy in many ways. I mean, just bringing in an early comparison with Masterpiece MP10 will show you what I'm on about, as if that toy is some sort of universal measurement for MP scale, then you really get an idea of just how mahoosive Stellarus Prominon really is. He's huge! But what's the story with this character anyway, and just why is he so big? Well, it all goes back to 1991 and the Japanese series known as Return of Convoy, which saw the release of the original Star Convoy toy, itself a lot larger than your typical Optimus Prime figures of the time. While Star Convoy never featured in a cartoon, he was immortalised in other fiction from the time, including the accompanying series known as Battle Stars, which was a series of story pages published in Japan's TV magazine. The storyline sees the Autobots rescuing Convoy's lifeless body before bringing him back from the dead yet again in the souped-up new form of Star Convoy. He's every bit as epic as you might expect of a powerful new form for the Supreme Autobot Commander, and immediately does his bit in terms of going about saving the day and all that kind of malarkey. You know how he does. Unfortunately though, he's not the only one to be resurrected, as Galvatron is also brought back, now in the fan favourite form known as Super Megatron. It's all good stuff. Now the original toy is a real standout of the time, being very handsome by itself, but also featuring tons of play value such as motorised gimmicks and the ability to convert into a base mode that is even compatible with Micromasters. Speaking of which, he also comes packaged with one of my personal favourite Micromaster toys, which is a miniaturised version of Hot Rod. He's absolutely adorable. Sadly, not all of that functionality has been carried over to the Ocular Max release, as we'll see, but they've certainly got the look right at least, as Stellarus Prominon is a real beaut to behold. Firstly, the proportions are very nice, with big chunky legs and a very beefy heroic upper body, but then with a surprisingly tapered waist in this case, allowing this version to feel a little more lithe and more in line with the Battlestar's portrayal if anything. The head sculpt is a real thing to behold too, really capturing Star Convoy's distinctive take on the classic Optimus noggin, and more than retaining the vintage figure's good looks, whilst again being a close approximation to the character's fictional resemblance too. You can even adjust the antenna out to the sides just a smidge should you wish. Those details continue further down onto areas such as the chest, which again is a very close match to both the story pages and the original toy. The signature gold chest star looks really nicely finished in hand, as do areas such as the chest grille and particularly the lights either side of it. Although if anything, I do kind of wish the translucent plastic windows were a little darker and more saturated in terms of colour, a bit like on the vintage toy, as whilst the blue is fine, it perhaps isn't as vibrant as it could have been. Elsewhere, this toy is really rather sparse in terms of finer detail, though that's far from a complaint, as I actually think it works well and helps Stellarus to look very sleek and clean in terms of design. There are little touches such as the Sergeant-esque stripes on either shoulder section, with a smooth area left untouched above, just waiting for an Autobot logo to be applied. In my case, I have a couple of handy repro labels from toyhacks.com ready to go, and it has to be said that with those in pride of place, the whole look just feels altogether more complete somehow. He looks marvellous in my opinion. Now, one thing I'm sure some people will comment on is the Kibley sections underneath the arms, with a whole front of the truck visibly just hanging off there for all to see. But to be fair, this is entirely accurate to the original toy's design, and consequently just one of those things we need to accept. There are some bits like the wheels on the back of the shoulders that are entirely new here though, although it feels very tidy tidy in my opinion. Similar story with the legs, now superbly articulated in a nice change of pace to the vintage toy, in that they look very clean on the whole and do a good job at recalling to mind Star Convoy's portrayal in Battlestars. Big fan of those rubber treads as well, although for now that's just teasing what's to come later on. Overall then, it's a really strong look for this toy, with even a rear view being surprisingly tidy, meaning that straight out of the box there's a lot to like about Stellarus Prominon. It also helps that he's remarkably well articulated, with a huge range of posability on the whole. The head has 2 points at the neck, meaning that it can move in some very expressive ways. The shoulders have some exceptionally strong and clicky ratchets going on, as well as an excellent amount of movement to boot. There are 2 joints upward at the shoulder and a butterfly joint as well, meaning that you can rock the arms back and forth slightly. Then there's a bicep swivel and double hinged elbows, allowing for an impressive degree of arm articulation overall. I would advise some caution however, as I have already noted some of the red plastic getting a bit chewed up on the swivel in the arms, just as a result of the very tight clearance going on. I'd say it should be fine if you're careful, but definitely one to watch all the same. Finally, the hands have a wrist swivel and separately articulated fingers with 3 points in each, with the thumb on a ball joint. Next you have a very stiff waist swivel in addition to several click points of ab crunch as well, meaning that the whole upper body of this toy feels very expressive. The same is true of the lower half to some extent, beginning with those ratcheted hips. They move very freely, although do require you to make sure that the hip skirts are out of the way at the same time. However, I did find that the ratchets were sadly not strong enough in this case, particularly on the right side of my copy, which doesn't want to hold in place against the weight of the leg beneath it. Then you have the knees, which although much stronger, sadly don't go past a couple of clicks to more than 45 degrees, meaning that they're the one major weakness on this toy in terms of overall posability. There have also been numerous reports of the knees collapsing far too easily on other people's copies, although to be fair, that hasn't really been a major problem in my experience thus far. There is a little kit to fix this included in the box should you need it though. Lastly, you have the feet, which feature a very decent inward ankle tilt and even a dab of heel and toe articulation to boot. When you can get him stood stably, he's an absolute beaut and rocks a dynamic pose like nobody's business. What a lad. And whilst he is rather light on accessories, I do really love the included hand blaster, which is very sizable and looks suitably imposing when pegged securely in hand. Stellarus even has a small feature that I always admire, which is having a realistically posed finger on the trigger, so that's something. Equally, there are the prominent cannons atop his shoulders, which can rotate at 2 points and really help this chap to achieve a signature part of his overall classic look. They're noticeably larger than on the original toy, bringing them more in line with the Battlestars portrayal, although with added silver in this case. I do kinda miss the Micromaster hot rod from the original figure, especially as G1 Star Convoy had a feature where you could pop the chest open and reveal a little command center for him. The chest does open in this case, although even with the vintage hot rod in hand, there's honestly nowhere for him to really go. Not to worry though, as what he lacks in gimmicks or accessories, Stellarus Prominon more than makes up for with sheer presence, as you can hopefully tell when stacking him up for comparison. Here you can see how sizable he is next to an array of Masterpiece carbots, for example. And whilst we don't yet have a suitable rendition of Star Convoy's Battlestars nemesis Super Megatron, this comparison will show you how he absolutely towers over the likes of the MP36 version of the character, along with his Decepticon lieutenants. In fact, he's so tall in robot mode that he reaches the upper echelons of big Masterpiece-style bots you might have in your collection already. Nah, I'm not talking about the likes of third-party combiners or whatever, but even just putting him against some of the larger lads I personally own, he's right up there, coming in just shy of the likes of Fans Toys Skyfire and clocking in around 32 centimeters all told. I did say that a huge part of the conversation with this guy was always going to be about his height, although it's also not the only thing to comment on, as there really is a lot to like here overall. Of course, that's only half the story, so let's go ahead and check out Transformation. So with transformation done, we can now behold the idiosyncratic oddity that can only be Star Convoy's vehicle form. But before we get to that, let's have a word about the transformation, shall we? Now, the original Star Convoy figure had a very straightforward conversion in that it follows the well-worn trope of being a big robot that essentially lies down, although there is some clever stuff in how the arms fold into place. By comparison, Ocular Max's effort keeps things simple in principle, especially as so much of it cribs off the vintage toy in many ways. But in practice, there are one or two moments which unfortunately end up being just a touch too fiddly for my liking. Don't get me wrong, things like the arms and the legs are as easy as they could be, but that unfolding backpack section is the main offender, mostly just for how it all tabs into place. There are a couple of tabs that need to be aligned very specifically for it all to work, so it can be a little bit frustrating if you don't get it just so. Still, it's not so bad on the whole and leaves you with this very interesting result. Now, I'm sure this vehicle mode isn't going to be for everyone, but again, it is very accurate to the original toy for the most part, and indeed a decent approximation of Star Convoy's appearance in the Battlestar storyline, albeit with a few differences such as the placement of those front turret guns not being atop the trailer section as they should be. That aside, even I have to admit that this isn't the most graceful or elegant alternate mode ever crafted, and whilst the original toy gets away with it on account of innate charm, this modern redo can't necessarily say the same. It's one of those where all the elements are essentially present and correct, and yet somehow it doesn't quite come together. It's hard to pinpoint. In any case, if you are looking for a suitable Masterpiece-style take on the Star Convoy character, then I suppose this is pretty much what you're in for, and to their credit, Ocular Max have created something big, chunky, and sort of fun in its way. There are rubber tyres along the first four wheels, and indeed on those rear treads as well, although I was slightly disappointed to see that the treads themselves don't actually roll, as that responsibility is instead given to the two fake wheels underneath. Hey ho. Elsewhere, the middle section looks a little bit panel heavy and doesn't quite clip together as neatly as I might like, but it's okay. The front of the cab looks decent enough, although again, perhaps not as spectacular as it could somehow. Now, another way this mode is a little lackluster is in the gimmicks. I mean, he is quite well served in terms of armament, with those turret guns on top of the cab and the blaster installed atop the trailer as well. And you can even move the blaster about a bit by raising it and twisting it to the side, so that's a bit of fun. But that's really it, which means that there's quite a lot of functionality missing when compared to the vintage toy. For one thing, that figure had a motorized gimmick, meaning it could roll along all by itself, with working rubber treads no less. In fact, there were loads of gimmicks on this toy, including some more functionality with the mini hot rod figure. But then it also had some play value in the trailer section too, as you could open it up to reveal a small shuttle transport type vehicle which itself could be used with Micromaster toys. You could fit a Micromaster inside each transport, and there was even a launcher gimmick allowing them to shoot out the rear end in a bit of excitement. But instead, Stellarus Prominon has none of that, leaving the rear end of the trailer just looking like a pair of folded up feet instead. Ho hum. All of that is to say nothing of G1 Star Convoy also having a base mode, of course, no matter how ridiculous it might be, especially as it could also combine with other toys of the time to form a Micromaster city, as also seen in the fiction. In any case, what you see is what you get with Ocular Max's take on the vehicle. It's a box ticker, if nothing else. Still, it is large and so gets the job done in that regard, as evidenced by comparing it to something like MP44 Convoy. He's a big beefy boy, and maybe that's enough for a third-party Masterpiece-style take on the character. Besides, despite the lack of gimmicks, there is still a lot to like about Stellarus Prominon on the whole, and certainly that robot mode is impressive enough to carry this whole package across the line in my opinion. There are some faults, and certainly some people have had complaints about the knees, although again there was a fix included in the box for that with my copy. All of which means that I've enjoyed my time with this toy on the whole, and despite its quirks, it remains a fairly decent toot. Now, as I've already mentioned, you will find a link to TF Source's site in the video description below, so please check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and my Redbubble store, so be sure to check those out if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. I'll even throw in a link to a resource for Transformers The Manga Volume 3, which is where you'll find a copy of the Battlestars translated into English alongside all kinds of other immaculately presented Japanese stories, should you wish to take a look. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, please, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts on Stellarus Prominon. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.